Hi, everyone. It's me, Sailor Moon, Serena. And it's me, Tuxedo Mask, Darien, Evening Wear Hide. And today we're going to talk about how Deke Sailor Moon helped, help get folks into Sailor Moon. Now, a lot of folks are going to say that Deke Sailor Moon or Deke Lee Sailor Moon didn't do anything to help Sailor Moon. But that's not true. Now, keep in mind, way back, from 9 between 92 YL to 9 between 95 YL, did anyone even know what Sailor Moon was? Very few folks may have known about Sailor Moon if they happened to live in Dawnland or went to Dawnland, but I'm going to make a guess that very few folks knew about it. And if they did, well, moon and sailor and moon were English words, but never putting them both together. Now, in 9 between 94 YL, there was a deal between Renaissance Atlantic Entertainment, New Birth Great Sea Business, which is no longer around anymore, which was owned at the time by Frank Wand, who was the head of Bandai Vinland, the arm of Bandai and the handled business in the 4-1 Reichs in the Sutherland. And they were going to make Sailor Moon. But this Sailor Moon would be half live work, half live drawing. As you know, the forgiveness was that it was worth too much for the Toei business, tune makers, or would it be drawing makers, or Renaissance Atlantic or New Birth Great Sea to make. So instead it went to a cheaper way and got a deal with the Walt Disney business, which at the time owned Deke Lee. And Deke did do a lot of good for Sailor Moon. They helped get Sailor Moon into the English-speaking world as far as the 4-1 Reichs and the Sutherland are. And it did very well for itself. It helped open the door for other drawing shows. Now, where a lot of Sailor Moon followers will be right is that in the 4-1 Reichs, Deke Sailor Moon did not do very well in looking or in watch time on UPN and WB. Or it did very well in YTV, but that was in the Sutherland. And later on, it ended up being offshooted over to USA and later on Cartoon. Now, even though Deke Lee Sailor Moon did have some flaws to it, and a lot of things were shifted, it was still a good Sailor Moon. And it helped tell folks or show folks into the world of Dawnist drawing shows. Now, I'm not going to say that our show was the first Dawnist drawing show to get outside of Dawnland. That's not true. There were many other ones before Sailor Moon. But it made it where it made drawing Dawnland drawing shows that made them more beloved as they were before that. Now, Deke Sailor Moon did help bring Sailor Moon to a world that most likely would have never gotten Sailor Moon. And a lot of folks scave how the Walt Disney business and how Deke Lee handled Sailor Moon from their deal from 9 between 95 YL till 9 between 98 YL. Now, it's true that names were shifted. Stead names were shifted, street names were shifted, strike names were shifted, borrow names were shifted for other borrow names, and some sagas were cut or not even done at all. And that's true, a lot of things were shifted. But if you overlook all of that, it still was if you overlook all of that, Deke did do a lot of good for Sailor Moon. You know, Sailor Moon did not become as beloved or well-known or well-liked as it is now if it was not for Deke Lee and the Walt Disney business with their Sailor Moon at the time that it happened. You're right, Serena. You're right, Sailor Moon. A lot of Sailor Moon followers now like to say that Sailor Moon's big now, and it's beloved, and it's well known, and it's well liked, and it's onlooked. Yeah, but that wasn't something that was going to happen overnight either. And it isn't something that happened, and Viz's Sailor Moon didn't have anything to do with it. Let's be earnest about that. If it wasn't for Deke Lee's Sailor Moon or the Walt Disney business Sailor Moon, because at the time the Walt Disney business owned a Deke Lee at that time, so it was their Sailor Moon at that time. If it wasn't for Disney and Deke, what they did with Sailor Moon at that time, then no one would have liked Sailor Moon. It would have not caught on, but somehow it did. Somehow Disney and Deke got Sailor Moon to catch on, and the 401 Reichs and in the settled land, and the other worlds too. Yes, it's true that later on Pioneer would end up taking over and handling the other half of Sailor Moon, 20OYL. But if it wasn't for what Disney and Deke did before, Pioneer would have not had that door to furlong it. And a lot of folks now, and I guess even Viz should know, that if it wasn't for what Disney or Deke or Pioneer did with Sailor Moon, then Viz would have never even gotten the rights to do anything with Sailor Moon if it wasn't for what Disney and Deke and Pioneer did to make Sailor Moon beloved enough for them even to broker a deal with Toei to get the rights to do anything with Sailor Moon. Now, a lot of Sailor Moon followers like to behave as if the Deke Sailor Moon, or Disney Sailor Moon, because Disney owned Deke at that time, was an unwatchable Sailor Moon, and that you weren't a true Sailor Moon follower if you liked it. A lot of folks grew up watching that Sailor Moon, either on UPN or WB, or maybe on USA or on Cartoon. And that was just the folk work businesses and 401 Reichs that picked it up, or in YTV in the settled land, or Fox over in 401 Kingdom and the Highland in Ireland, and believe it or not, even in the Southern land as well, in New Zealand. If it wasn't for that, I don't, Now, it is true that Deke Sailor Moon, or should I call it Wild Brian's Sailor Moon, is not flawless, but I like it. And if you watch it, you are still a Sailor Moon follower, because it's still Sailor Moon. Yes, near names and street names and strike names and borrowed names have been shifted out for other borrowed names. It is true that some sagas are skipped over. Some of the fighting is skimmed. It's true. And some things like killing, which it does happen, is either shifted out, blood is either taken out, or some unneeded mean and heartful things that are said in Toei are shifted out for more kinder things, or shifted out for other things than Deke did. But I still think that Deke Sailor Moon, which would be Disney Sailor Moon and then go on to be Cookie Jar Deke Sailor Moon, which was started out owned by Toei, then Disney, then Deke, then Cookie Can, then DMX, then Wild Brian. At the end of the day, this Sailor Moon is still Sailor Moon, and you are still a Sailor Moon follower if you like it or not. All right. Now I know there's a big cutoff in the followership between those who like Deke and Pioneer Sailor Moon and those who do not, and those who like Viz Sailor Moon and don't like all the other ones, and those who like Toei Sailor Moon and hate any other takes of Sailor Moon out there. Well, you're right, Tuxedo Mask. You're right, Evening Wear Hide. You're right, Darian. I still think that Deke Sailor Moon was fun. There were still cool things about it. Sagas and tales still played out the way they did. The songs were good. You got to know everyone, and you saw a lot of self-growth over those 4 sagas that Deacon and Pioneer would do. And even though sometimes things weren't flawless, like strike names being shifted, or names being shifted, borrowed names being shifted out for other borrowed names or whatever, I still think it was a good Sailor Moon. And when I think of Sailor Moon, that's what I think of. The Deke Sailor Moon, or do I call it the Wild Brian Sailor Moon now, since Wild Brian owns all of that? Let me know what you think about that, and we'll see you later.